You are listening to Something Rather Than Nothing. Creator and host, Ken Vellante. Editor and producer, Peter Bauer.
But yeah, you're talking about the Manchester and the buildings and the layout. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's mad. Now that I think it's beautiful. It's a gorgeous city in the sense that it's a combination of urban but very natural in the way that it's urban, both modern and quite ancient, kind of pre-20th history. It's not ancient really, of course, but you know what I mean. It's
I know what you mean.
Yeah, it's very industrial. It's very, and I know a lot of people aren't really a fan of that maybe, but I think personally it has its own charm. It has a real history that comes from Manchester, obviously, is like the cotton industry, the textile industry, and the fact that it has come through adaptations and it's kind of translated into sort of living and accommodation, because it's a very attractive city for students. We have so many international students. There's about, I think, a third of our economy is made up of students
Really?
themselves.
Wow.
Yeah, it's mad. And generally, I think it's just a hub for all things art, all things media, which is, where I happily support and, want to always step in with whatever project's going on. But yeah, I can be more grateful to be in Manchester, but yeah.
Yeah, well, we might have a lot of connection as far as maybe at least being around that. I grew up in, oh, you're gonna dig this. I grew up in Pawtucket, Rhode Island, East Coast,
Wow. Oh, nice. Oh my
So
gosh.
so check this out, the connection with Manchester and all that stuff. The
Mm.
first mill was put on the Blackstone River uh, in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. So it's deemed the birthplace of the American Industrial Revolution.
That's
So
so cool.
so they stole the plans from over there in England, dragged them here, right? This dude said, I figured out how to do this, put it down, and so it powered the so it was it was on the river, the mill,
Mm.
and what it did was it powered all the mechanics to they would call it mule spinning with the
Right.
fabric and the wool and all those mechanisms. So that's how it was powered. So where I grew up was
Mm.
like the earliest kind of like industrial US area. And that's what I grew up in the after, like 1980s,
Right.
kind of like the collapse, the same kind of trend you see in England where that collapse in the 80s of the
Mm.
Thatcher and Reagan and all this conservative
Yes. Yeah.
ideology. But that's a long story. I'm guessing, Zainab, we're gonna be able to talk about probably a billion things, but we should probably like welcome the listeners into since we've been waiting to talk with each other. We haven't talked yet. We've just emailed, but
Yeah.
we connect probably, and I want to learn a bunch really about the things that you do. But everybody, we're talking with Zainab Imran. Is that the best pronunciation?
Yeah. Yeah.
Zainab
Perfect.
Imran. We're reaching her from, as you might have heard, talking a little bit about industrial background from Manchester, England, and I just really want to welcome you onto the show.
Thank you
And
so much. Thank
yeah,
you.
I wanted to say just the chance happening of what I dig is just seeing you read poetry. I'm very kind of impacted, but when you see a poetry performance that's like that, like I still
Oh
have that
my God.
sensitivity. So that I just saw that, and then I saw you made zines, and
Mm.
you work in kind of like work with community organizing, and you're active in the community. So a whole bunch of things to talk about, but why don't you just tell us a little bit about some of the things you're doing, like maybe even start with the zine and the type of
Yeah.
poetry you do. It'd be a great introduction for the listeners.
Of course, thank you. That was such a gracious introduction, regardless. So thank you so much. It
Of
means
course.
so much. Yeah, I think I began poetry, I want to say, in written form. I guess around early sort of adolescent, young adult kind of vibe. I'm going to say around the age of maybe 14, 15 is when I got serious, I guess. 10, 11, 12 is when you're kind of figuring out how to rhyme and everything, because they've been,
Yeah.
giving you the awful kind of, I guess, poetry that you don't really gel with at that moment. Then, you sort of put your toe in here and there and whatnot. So, and then I think I didn't get serious about it until I want to say maybe 2.5 years ago, about like performing.
Yeah.
And it comes as a shock to people, of course, as well.
I did have some shock in hearing that, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, God, yeah. I think I just was very much like still finding my footing in the literature scene, because I'm a huge reader. I love reading. I do an English degree, and I want to pursue sort of academia within like English and creative writing especially. And I think I kind of realized, as much as I can love Larkin, as much as I can love, I have a special place in my heart for Robert Frost, especially as
Oh
well.
my gosh.
Yeah, cannot beat Frost in my opinion. And I feel like I then kind of gelled back into the contemporary UK scene of poetry, which is very much not as developed, unfortunately, as the American
Okay.
scene. Because you have brilliant American poets, I think, but I
Oh, for
definitely,
sure. Yeah.
yeah. Nowadays, I'm sort of like Chen Chen, Kaveh Akbar. I'll talk more about obviously the poets that really inspire me, but
I got to write down mine so we can get back to it too. Keep going.
yes. But yeah, I think I definitely just picked up on poets from the UK of like diaspora, especially. That is it's really interesting. It is kind of an aged term to say like a diaspora poet, or a poet from a person of color, a poet of color, because I
Sure.
feel they're everywhere now. Like, it's not like a unique kind of individual label we can give anyone, I think, anymore, because it is very much leveled out the playing field from, I'd say, like the late 90s. But it was kind of seeing how people take colonial history, post-colonial history, and immigrant history especially as well, that I was like, and Manchester is a very much just an immigrant hub next to London. Is London, Birmingham, these are all like the massive multicultural cities, but Manchester has its own rich, deeply rooted history in immigration, migrant sort of Windrush especially. So I think I was very much intrigued by the struggle from like the 60s onward. And I always say to my mum and like my parents, God, I have it easy when it comes to being a person of color compared to, and being like a creative, compared to whatever people had to go in the 70s.
You can find
because
more space in that sense. Like there's
absolutely,
for you
yeah,
to do what you would like to do now.
for real,
Yeah.
honest to God, it's so much more base. Yeah, it is very much the idea of generating space and keeping space is very much something that isn't, I think, focused on enough, because people will do an event, people will hold a space, and it will happen, and it will stay, not to repeat myself, but in space, it will stay kind of
Yeah.
static there, and never is there anything that comes from it, or isn't not further developed. So very much, there are very few unique kind of events and companies, charities that I feel have really reached out and been able to nurture people like me and myself, and so many of my friends who are also performers, poets, writers. But I would say, yeah, it's been a roller coaster for one thing, and the zines is a whole other thing, because I think I was very much frustrated by the inability to get published work,
Well,
like that. Because
let's
yeah,
geek out. Let's geek out on
mm,
zines now.
yeah, absolutely. I think zines are the most underrated, yet are arguably the most significant sort of object of creative history that not a lot of people have been able to, I think, be introduced to. It's not even like a gate kept sort of creative community
Yeah.
at all. It's
Interesting.
so accessible. It's
Yeah.
very much like anyone can do it. But then you kind of like, why isn't anyone, showing me what they're making in their spare time. They're collaging, or picking flowers from their local park and something, and being like, it reminded me of this person because we tripped over this stone and they fell into this bush and it was near these flowers. Like, there's gorgeous stories behind zines, I feel, and I felt there's obviously not an artifice, but there's a certain authority when it comes to publishing, of course. And I
Sure.
love the authority that I have with zines, in that I can, make it very personal or make it very private. And because it is nothing huge, it's nothing like a huge magazine or a quarterly sort of publication where you've got like a whole host of brilliant pieces of art, pieces of literature, pieces like reviews and everything. So I guess it was kind of just me foolishly being like, I'm very frustrated by being rejected from publishers, or from magazines. Let me do something myself. And from then I was like, I actually enjoy it more than having to listen or getting, a cold shoulder from an editor. So
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
might think that's a bit malicious of me to say, though, but it does.
No,
Yeah.
no, it's
Uh,
that you're talking too about like um being able to control and to like
mm,
decide and allow out. What I found that when I started like creating things regularly about 4 years ago, be paintings, podcast, etc. Um, I found that um, I had an experience trying to go through a way. My life and history is tied to being a union rep. Uh,
mm,
that's my
brilliant.
that's I
Yeah.
moonlight with art.
Mm,
So I just became really fascinated by just how I was trying to handle that, and how I was trying to how I was trying to do that. I didn't want to have to go through anybody. I felt like I was at an age, I was like 45, I'm 50 now. So I'm like, I don't want to like have to be asking people like to go through things. I want to ask people directly who I want to talk to
hmm
about doing the thing with me. I don't want to worry about the door. I want to be like, do you want to come talk and play? And and I think zines in that same type of way, I found very much the same. I'm like, well, I'm not trying to push out things to get published. I never had time or didn't dedicate myself in that particular way. I've
mm.
had things published, but I didn't spend a lot of time there. So with zines and podcasting, it seems like, well, you got an idea, push it. You don't have to ask anybody. And pretty freeing, huh,
It
Zainab?
is. That
Yeah,
that is exactly it. It's that, yeah, the whole the whole permission thing is kind of like, I think my dad was just saying today as well, like, imagine we're gonna reach a point of where we have so much information at our hands that we're gonna not know what to do with ourselves. I
yeah,
was like, well, we do know what to do with ourselves because we're doing stuff for ourselves. I think we're kind of, not wanting to reverse gear and be like, is this okay according to, whatever, do I need to go through here and this? You're like, no, you have the means, you have the resources, so why not? And as you say, like, being a union rep, was it you were saying, right?
yeah. That's
And
what I said.
how practical you have to be, and that is in of itself, because like, I'm going not through it, I'm just recently we had news of strikes within our university for about
Yeah,
4 weeks, right?
sure,
And so 2 weeks have gone by, and obviously I've been through it for like 3 years. I'm so used to it, and we all support the strike workers, but now they've kind of reached an ultimatum to agree, so they've
sure.
called off the strikes for now. But to go on campus and see people there every day, the same people as well, it's so inspiring. And I think you're right in, yeah, people within the zine community, especially very political people who I've met, who have, altered the way I think about space
For
and the
sure.
way I think, yeah, the people can really impact you when they talk to you about photography, when they talk to you about landscaping or any sort of kind of medium. They're very much authoritative and understanding of how to generate messages. And I think that's the main thing I like about art is message, because there is no such thing, I think, as art without a message. And it's weird when people say to artists or musicians, you shouldn't be political. That is that
Yeah,
seems
it's like pull out that thread, and the thing doesn't hold together. It's within that context. It's so controlling. It's so
mm,
you must now not say things of import because you've entered this milieu or something like that.
oh yeah.
I don't know. One of the things I wanted to mention, in just our probably some of our thinking with the zine,
Mm,
podcast has a zine, and we'll be putting out
yeah.
the second issue, which is going to be an all indigenous issue.
Wow.
Yeah, the second issue, and it's DIY, and had the first issue, but just like trying to display in a particular way
Mm,
artists or the sounds that I've come in contact with, like it'd be music and visuals or a special project. And as you know, like when you're into that tactile, when you're in the bookstore, you're looking through the zines, they can be particularly and incredible as far as their composition, that there's
mm,
thread or embroidery, or it might sound kind of weird just talking about it, but there's all these different forms. And then
yes.
you're
Yeah.
talking about the super practical impact of a zine that says, "You're a black man, you got pulled over,
Mm,
here's what you do." Like a zine that you look at and be like, just remember this would be a good thing to do and not to do. Or I want to start a union where I work zine.
yeah.
Like, what are the steps? So just like it could be so much, artful and towards that, but it could also be like, put this in your pocket and knowing when you're in this situation, how to get out of it.
Yeah. It's not even like a get out of jail free, but it feels like a little man in your in your pocket just giving you advice. Yeah, that's very true. And how you said about the different formats and the different art forms. And I remember one of my friends, they're an artist and they do architecture, and they had this gorgeous zine that they posted online, and it was just the pages were just letters, like cut out letters instead of like actual pages. So I think they were spelling a word and I couldn't figure out what it was. I still need to ask them, like, show me that zine. I really want to see it. But even, yeah, as you said, some photography ones that I've seen. There was one beautiful one that's on my shelf right now of I got from a zine fest. It was of someone who'd taken pictures after their grandmother had passed away, and how I think it was about 3 months after, how everything had been left untouched in the house.
Oh,
It's gorgeous. I will send you a picture of them as well if I can find. I think I can see it right there actually. And the he was telling me how he hated how the hedge at the back garden had overgrown because she was so on it with like trimming the hedge
you always see it
constantly.
one way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, that hits really hard. Just the idea of what you leave behind and the fact that everything continues with the bereaved and with who has been, kind of taken from you, and the fact that the world, the home, the home in of itself doesn't care for kind of static or kind of grief or anything. It just collects dust. It still grows, still collects water, collects damp, collects mold in the ceiling. It's so poignant. So that zine really brings me down to earth. It is really depressing to kind of read, so I don't read it all the time, but
Yeah.
it's beautiful is all I can say. It's very poignant. Yeah.
Yeah. I wanted there's a couple points, like I stop signs for myself here, and
Yeah.
it's not even the bigger questions, but I wanted to take the opportunity because I've done over 180 shows, and I've had
Mm,
just a variety of different type of artists, and I've done it for
mm,
long enough that I think back within a category and being like, what type of poets that I've had, and I just wanted to mention it just a bit. Within my first 10 episodes, I think I had Bunkan Tuan, who's
yes.
my friend BK, who I went to university with, the University of Massachusetts, very close and dear
Wow.
to my heart.
Yeah.
And he is just an incredible poet and friend, and a collaborator of his, Joanna Valente, which is close to my last name. I had her on, and she talked about a lot of gender issues and really socially important issues. I remembered when I interviewed Seamus Murphy, who's the director for PJ Harvey, Polly Jean Harvey's videos, that she had done a book which explored Afghani Lande, I believe it's pronounced Lande poetry, like a style of poetry there.
Right.
So, and there's a few, like, I've had just these incredible experiences in talking about poetry. When you said Robert Frost, I want to tell you, just a weekend or two ago, I was with my girlfriend Jenny, and we were going through the Oregon Garden, where you can see hundreds. It's cold here right now, or colder.
Yeah.
You can see hundreds of plants and firs and trees and everything like this. And when we were going by birches, and I'm from New England, so I point out, like, Jenny, I got to tell you my special connection, because Robert Frost did this poem, Birches, and I've listened to it where he sings it. He reads it in his gravelly Robert Frost. I can't even possibly do it, New England voice.
Oh wow, yeah.
So I hadn't thought about birch trees in a while. There are as many birches are out in the Western U.S. as the U.S., but I had Robert Frost going through my head this like 2 weeks ago. So when you said Robert Frost, I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to talk about my Robert Frost.
That's brilliant. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, famous poem, Birches, and there you can find a audio recording of him reading that poem.
Yeah. It takes a lot from the mind, I think, when you hear a poet. Birches that's insane. That's what a brilliant connection that is as well, Ken. Yeah.
It is the one other thing I wanted to mention is I drop in and out of poetry, kind of like picking it up a bunch and then getting some more later on. But one poet that I really like that I wanted to mention is Morgan Parker from the U.S., who did a collection, There Are More Beautiful Things Than Beyonce. I'm not sure if you ever heard of that.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Wow.
Yeah. So I wanted to mention Morgan Parker. And like you said, there are so many great American poets find themselves like in independent presses and such. Can you tell me, so you go out there and you're in front of a camera and you're delivering like important, impactful poems. No, but just how do you see, when we talk about poetry, how do you see it? Is it how how are you putting it together in that form, and in conjunction with delivering it like you deliver it? What's it mean to you?
Yeah, I sometimes wonder if when a poet that I'm kind of friends with, one time he said, if he could be a singer, he would have been a singer, not a poet. Like, if you could sing. And I was kind of like thinking, like, is that just what I want to do as well? But no, the process is kind of like, you just have a mind splurge, of course. And I think I definitely learned from other poets as well, is that the most mundane makes the most interesting conversation starter sometimes. So you can talk about, I think, I saw this truck fly by me and I thought it was the tree kind of whispering, run, but really it was a plastic bag coming outside from the back. And something like that, when you say that with some sort of, conjecture and power to an audience, they're like, okay, but who was whispering to you? But like, these kind of, you kind of have to realize how practical certain, vernacular, certain images can be when it's written down on paper. And I think it is definitely just looking at other performers that I've aspired to be like as well. And I am a huge believer in notes and just constantly raking through and making sure I know when to pause and I know when to hit an impact and everything, because I love to kind of I hate the sound of my own voice, but I, record, read it back and everything as well. That is an instinctual, I think isn't like an instinct thing now for me, that I'm like, okay, does this make sense to my brain? How is that gonna, process to others as well? But I think for performing, it is pretty much this, like, how do I know what will fall flat and what will, there's some times where it's been like, someone's come up to me afterwards, they're like, that line you did about, the chameleon or something, that hit me really hard, that was brilliant. And I'll be like, that was not the line I expected to hit hard, folk. It's so unpredictable as well, because there are certain moments where you read a line very differently and you kind of alter the room and you shift it quite a bit, I feel like, as well, if you kind of pronounce something a little more within a sentence rather than like the very final word, because I feel like a lot of people assume the very final words of what can give you clarity about a poem, but I kind of disagree in that you have to kind of see what's setting up. And I love when poets set up something beautiful, something audacious or absolutely seemingly obnoxious, and then when it ends in like a really blunt sentence, you're like, wow, so you wanted me to get that thing initially, but I was waiting for something else, and now you just throw me off my feet. I'm yet to capture that perfectly. I know so many poets that do that really well, but I think I'm still not very confident in performing Madly Enough, which sounds ironic because I consider myself a performing poet, so it's very ironic. But I'm still a phone in my hand or a notebook in my hand if I want to be a bit classy for the evening. And I think having the ability to kind of look into someone and look, eyes, windows to the soul, all that jazz, sure. But the idea of just interrupting yourself and kind of allowing disruption to emerge, I think is the thing that kind of keeps me wanting to perform, is that I want to, sure, disrupt narrative, but disrupt the evening, disrupt the piece that people have carved in their minds about poetry, because people see poetry as very peaceful, very, clicking fingers, having a good time, and it is a good time.
It's all over the freaking universe, all over the universe, and super small and tiny and huge too.
Huge,
help me out on the performance, and I want to talk about that, because there's pieces that I'll just talk about seeing as effective. When I first saw you, that captured my eye, and your delivery and what you were doing is, even on what I saw, is that the angle is up towards you and your face is facing out, and you're delivering, and you're straight on the delivering. I mean, it's just right there, and there's a confidence. But I'm like, who is this? I see the hijab, and I'm like, and I'm reading about you back. No, like for me, I'm just I'm out here in Oregon. I'm like, and so I'm watching all of that too, and I wonder, because poets are never meant to fit into the day fabric.
God,
it's not like, oh, I'm walking down the street and the poet's just talking. That's wonderful. The poet's just talking. It's poetry is poetry. People are like, what's going on? So I get captured, by that moment and by that there, and
Thank you.
Just to affirm it. It's both visually and sonically, where you're looking in and you're following. What happens for you? You're the only person on the other side, and you're standing there. Tell us about what you see from the audience, or like what that is.
Yeah. What do I see? I thankfully see people, as you said, I really enjoy when people are very much enraptured, because as you said, poets, we're not meant to have very exciting lives. we kind of just walk around and, sort of dig out sort of little treasures, sort of nuggets of ideas here and there. It's a very, very mundane life. So when you get up on stage, and when you put yourself there, when you see everyone, and it's so bizarre because everyone is looking at you and looking for you to kind of command and, sort of change the way that they're thinking, because after every poet you're going to change. When it's an open mic, whether it's like a headline performance, whatever it is, you're going to change the way you thought about, sure, that person, but also what a specific word meant, or does
So
this
personal.
image,
It
yeah,
always ends up being so. There it is.
yeah, absolutely. Like the image, I think the other night when I went to, I did like a show, someone had a beautiful image of the sickle cell, which is well, it was a disease, obviously, the sickle cell disease.
Yes.
But this, image of the moon, this image of, the Grim Reaper, this image of harvest, of a harvest moon, of expansion, of closing in. You can't get through your vessels. And I was like staring at them in such awe. And I was like, wow, that's insane. And so how people reciprocate to me, I think, is I see, thankfully, very much enraptured people. And I love to kind of look up, look around, just so everyone knows. I feel like a little teacher sometimes. I'm like, I want everyone to know I'm looking at you, and I want you to take this in, because it's not for me anymore. What's for me is, the thousands of sticky notes that I've written poems on that are under a floorboard. That's for me. this stuff is for you, and I want you to absorb. I want you to, rip it to pieces afterwards if you want, if you can remember any of it.
Yeah.
But I think, and I love that people follow tradition, and it's so unspoken when people like click their fingers. People saying yes, people saying woo halfway through. I'm like, I don't care about tradition at that point. I'm like, do it, react, show me. This is the Shakespeare, like the Globe at this point. Just react, tell me what you're feeling.
Art free for alls.
Yeah, I'm sick and tired of one-way communication with poetry, because it should never be one way. And I think Mona Arshy is this brilliant poet. She describes it perfectly in that poetry. The best sort of poetry is meant to shift your atoms. It's meant to do something kind of like a bodily reaction almost. And I thought that is the most beautiful, gorgeous piece of advice next to, life lesson about poetry that you could learn. And it's not even something you should aspire to either. It's just something you should look out for when you're going through and listening to poets and being like, this did shift something in me. So thankfully, I don't get to see anyone sort of like, tearing up or anything like that. that would send me off the edge completely.
Yeah, well, yeah. The boundaries and the issues of reciprocity, or like exchange. I wanted to we got to hit one of the big ones. We got to hit one of the big questions here, because we can go in a lot of different directions. But I want to. So what is? I'm talking about art. I wanted to ask you one of the big questions I ask. What is art, or what do you think art is?
I love that. I love that question. In fairness, though, I think it's such a it's a scary one, because it's like one of those ones you get in like a job interview or something, and you could get like 5 billion different answers, and they could still not hire you. But I think I have a personal story for it, to be fair, and even though in the context of what that person said to me, it was talking about literature and the significance of literature. Obviously, art, literature, they all fall under same umbrella, as you know. And I can't say I'm like a painter or a sculptor or anything, obviously, but I remember so we have something called A levels, which is just what we do before we go into college or university, right?
Okay.
And we just have to do we specifically have to choose 3 to 4 subjects, and then you can choose from that whatever degree you want to do. So I kind of knew I wanted to do English, so I automatically did English literature. So I'm there, I'm 16, I don't know, what I want to do with my life, really. I want to be an author, but about 10 sort of counselors have told me that's, kind of improbable, like it's not going to happen to you. Sort of, not going to happen to you, but kind of just being like, don't get your hopes up.
Yeah.
And I remember my tutor, who I only had him for about 6 months, but he was very impactful in that short amount of time. And he just asked us, what do you think the purpose of literature is? We were like, to store information, to make a reader, relate to a character, to teach all these like sort of mundane kind of answers that you'd expect. And then he goes, no, you're all wrong. We were like, oh, okay, sure.
Right.
But we were like, okay, should we just leave? He was like, literature is an art, is the response to something wrong within society, is when someone saw something horrific going on in the streets, is when someone saw the French Revolution, someone, saw slavery occurring and said, this is wrong, this is not meant to be happening. I'm gonna have to respond to this. What do I do? How do I respond?
Yeah.
And some of us aren't endowed with sort of political power. We aren't very privileged. We don't have, mummy daddy's money and able to sit in houses of parliament or in the Senate or anything like that. So we turn to art and we make commentary. Sure, that is the right word. But I think a lot more just active protest. And you can look at it from any perspective, whether it's kind of like very emotional. And some people obviously like say artists are very narcissistic, and we are. I can't deny that we aren't, because we kind of, in a society where we're all like, working together, the cogs are working together. You're meant to be functioning.
There always tends to be excesses, and then it can be excesses of ego. Not to get into the whole psychology, but there's a lot. There's a lot.
Absolutely. Oh God, yeah, absolutely. So, in no shape or form would I say that the ego is something that motivates all poets and all artists, though. Either definitely, that's not how true art forms, though. I think is the main thing. And there's, you could argue that so many artists, so many poets are there for the ego, there for the, the praise, but it is a lot more protest commentary, I think. And yeah, just sure, it is like the archiving and the keeping together of history. Keeping together is the awful phrase, but kind of, the restoring of history, just so people understand the bucket loads of information we have now, and the instantaneous click of your finger and everything's there for you. How does that come about? Through translation, through globalization, especially as well, because art is so global. Art is meant to transcend language, is meant to transcend any sort of class, age, and I'd say like even gender, even ethnicity, is meant to cross boundaries, and it shouldn't ever be contained, whether it's contained within a community or contained from individuals, from other people, sure. But yeah, this idea is not very much, now it's not a communal activity. I feel it's very much like a public free-for-all, which I'm so much more happier about.
As far as the availability or the access, or even things like distribution of getting things, getting pardon me, getting your things out there. I was a English lit and philosophy major, as an undergraduate, and I went on to actually get a master's in philosophy, which that makes sense, and labor studies, which I ended up, doing. But I mean, the literature. I've been like, folks who are listening might not know, there's a lot of books behind Zainab, so I've been like, I haven't complained to her about this yet, but I've been like, so she would know, just like I would know, that when somebody is showing books in whatever way, the person who's obsessed by books, which I know we share, is going to be the what is that one, and what's that one. And to add even more, I know you live in Manchester, which is far away, so I'm guessing there might be a lot of different books that are really cool that you would have picked out that I wouldn't have seen. So.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in just the difference in not really audience, but kind of the outreach, as you said, the distribution of of literature and what you pick up. Like when I go, so you'd have like a Barnes and would you usually go to like Barnes and Noble or like
Let me stop. If rate, I got a bookstore that I've talked about
mm,
right nearby. It's a used bookstore. It's a block and a half
nice.
away from here. Browser's bookstore, and
Ooh.
I get they're revived, and I go there and talk art and but yeah, I got one nearby. But the big one still out here, just so you know, is Barnes and Noble's like the only big
Mm,
bookseller here in the U.S. That's left.
yeah.
Sorry for that, Jag. I used to work in a bookstore, as you might imagine. So that's please, audience and Zainab, just
I'm not complaining. I
no, good.
I
I
love
know you
hearing about
won't, but
bookstores. Yeah.
it's only so long you want to talk to the book clerk when they're the book clerk.
True.
Um, oh, so yes, literature and philosophy.
Mm. How was it? I'm sorry, I just
Yeah,
wanted to
go ahead.
ask how, yeah, like what was it like doing the turning to the philosophy side from kind of the combination of English and philosophy? Because
Um,
yeah.
uh, I thank you for asking. Complicated, but I would say simply this. My first love is literature. Out of
Mm,
anything, whatever I cover or whatever I do in work or anything, it's literature. It all stems from there. But I think that I just wanted to explore the questions that I was not dealing with. That why did I read compulsively?
mm,
I read from an early age compulsively because it fit my mind. I went to different worlds. If I felt uncomfortable in the spot that I was in, I
mm,
could read and not sound like just like strange and quaint, but I could very much be somewhere else.
yeah.
And I started to interrogate like larger questions or thinking like reading like James Baldwin in the U.S. and the experience of African Americans, and so then it was political.
Mm,
Um, but all those questions punch towards the conceptual for me, at least the way my mind develops. So like I could always explore them in literature and poetry and other things, but I
mm,
wanted to train myself in that like maybe the art of philosophy or the art of talking and engagement and exploration. But I got to tell you one thing that I know only in retrospect, as great as that is and as helpful it is for me, it was so limited to that narrow canon of white men
mm,
who were great philosophers, but only in retrospect that I truly realized, because I kept studying on my own,
yeah.
wow, that's a important piece, but good gracious, there's so much more. And I'm like, oh, that's when I went to school. It wasn't terribly long. It was long enough ago, but it's like
Yeah.
that's kind of how I feel about it.
I feel, I'll be honest, I don't think it's changed, unfortunately, for a lot of places. So you're absolutely right yeah, that criticism is is very like the only experience I've had with philosophy is because I do classics as a minor, I guess. So I took a course in Senecan philosophy. That was interesting. That
Yeah.
was intriguing to move from. I moved from like I had like an ancient sort of like ancient origins kind of Greek poetry course, and then I moved to Seneca the next hour, and I was like transported to Rome all of a sudden. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, I love that you are kind of deeping and developing with the philosophy. And yeah, I think questions are the most important thing we have as our tools, and that is like the main purpose of any sort of philosophical or literature kind of based discussion. Whenever I'm talking to someone, I want them to, you know, always be willing to hear a question out rather than just be like da, da, da. And I really enjoy when lecturers are kind of very interactive that way, even though some of them can be a bit of a stretch and I'm not awake at night in the
So
morning.
yeah, you've been 70 minutes in, and they're way over here, and you're like, you're
Yeah.
explaining something to me. I get it, but sure. you're very far away from the rest of us. That can happen at the uni, right?
Yeah, God.
Um, but no, first love literature. I
Mm,
really enjoy that, and I think one of the strange thing is, and I'm not sure if you've encountered this, but I've been intense in particular areas, and I think there's when you're intensive or super interested in multiple areas. I know when I studied philosophy, I ended up being surprised because in my head I thought that most people who come from philosophy be so deeply into the words, whether it was literature or fiction and
mm,
all those type of things. It was not the case at all because I look at their bookshelves and it'd be just studious and narrow and sequential, and that's
mm,
fine. That's their mind. But I was like, how do you do philosophy without having read a Faulkner, or like
yeah.
how do you do philosophy without I don't know, in my head like Kathy Acker or like Leo
Mm,
Tolstoy or like Simone de Beauvoir. Like how do you do these
yeah.
things without these influences? But that's unfair. That's the way my head works, but they did it this way. So I never
Mm,
disaggregated the literature and the philosophy and never could. And one other final thing as far as like the identity around that, when I was studying philosophy at Marquette University, it was the only time I went to a private university and I got a scholarship to study there. I was
brilliant.
very much a
Wow.
fish out of water, as you can
Yeah.
speculate or guess, very much so.
Mm,
But when I was there, everybody viewed me as this like super practical oriented, like kind of like I got the East Coast accent.
yeah.
This kid's from the city. How do you end up at Marquette? Like all that and super
Wow.
into like books and words and weird things. So they always saw me as like that, like not fitting
Mm,
into the model of this. And then when I went to go into labor studies, everybody thought I was the foofiest, like theoretical, conceptual. Oh, Mister, like ask him about this super big question. I'm like, no, like I'm union guy, like I'm ready for the
yeah.
battle. And I found that time to be so fascinating because I'm like, no, like, like
And what are you? Oh,
so
that's so bizarre, but very much something I can imagine happened as well.
yeah,
Like,
yeah.
that's,
Who are you?
yeah.
And that's why not to go too on, but literature
Mm.
and philosophy, they're globbed in my brain. How
Yes.
they're globbed, and I think if you go into different things like yourself, you see how things are just kind of. I don't know how to separate them out.
No, yeah, you're absolutely no. That's so true. I haven't felt that, but it's very much in my mind whenever I switch from like a classics. So someone will ask me, "Oh, what's your next essay on?" I'm like, "Oh, it's a classical literature one. I have to do, this piece about Plato or something like that." And they're like, "Wow, how do you keep that in your mind? How do you remember?" I'm like, "I don't." But it's very much a thing of like, wow, this is really intriguing. How do you, class? And as you said, like philosophy is. I love that you brought up thingy, like the fact that you're right. How do people not read Faulkner? How do they not read? For myself, I'd say Aldous Huxley because he had a huge
Sure.
impact on me in the first year of university when I'd read. I think I'd read Brave New World when I was 17. Didn't really understand it. And then I read it again when I was 19, and I was like, I don't know how it shifted in my
That book
brain, but
really
it shifted.
impacted me. That book really
Yeah.
impacted me around 16, 17. I read it like 4 or 5 times. Yeah, yeah, really.
Right? And
Yeah,
it's brilliant. It's
yeah.
absolutely brilliant book. But you're right in that how have people not read Baldwin, Audre Lorde, you know, Harger, like all these brilliant sure, yeah, poets as well, like HD or Anne Carson, who have had brilliant takes on. I think classical literature is obviously what I kind of really it's a guilty pleasure for me at this point, as well as my degree. But,
A guilty
uh,
pleasure luxury that I shall indulge it any time that I
yeah,
ever want in my
and
life,
I
any day.
don't have anything due for it, like no deadlines whatsoever. Like I can just do it in my free time. God no. But yeah, just bring it when you I bring up Carson or something in like a or no, I'd say it's like the other way around. So one time I brought up like narrative theory because I did a narrative theory course and I brought up morphology, which is Vladimir Prop, who is this Russian narrative theorist. And I think I was just saying, the way we know narrative is kind of working is the fact that we have these functions and these spheres of action. We have these characters are like the princess and the hero, the villain, the false hero. And I swear someone just turned around and looked me dead in the eye whenever I was saying that. I was like, if you want to say something, you can say it, but I'm just sharing information. Like, I don't know what you want from me. But they were, I think they were like, in their heads, they were like, how does this apply to Homer? Who knows?
Right.
It does. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And you had it. I wanted to ask you, Zainab, you about looking at your website and just listing as a South Asian creator. And I noticed a lot of things that you write about and talk about that's kind of like an action sphere. And I just wanted to like ask you about like that group. I know you've done like like interview and you do poetry but it's your thing, so I wanted to ask you about it.
Yeah, I think is so interesting because I feel like there's very much a gap for South Asian creatives to be able to freely discuss what they feel about current climate and kind of just the history of, I'd say from my personal experience, like the UK's relation to South Asia. So when I created Poets Partition, I think I was very much in shock of myself that I didn't know partition had happened. And I always, it's really bizarre, but you think of your homeland as just this place. You don't think of it as a third world country suffering. Or I'll be honest, like I never knew it was a third world country, or I didn't know it was going through so much turmoil, because when you go and visit, you have these little snapshots in your mind. You have these, conversations and relations and everything. And then when you come back and you learn of history, or when you watch a TV program or something about it, you're like, okay, well, why is this just the one-off? Why are people just talking about it once? Why can't I, get people together and be like, so what are your opinions of this? Yes, I think this too. Oh, I've never thought of it that way. So I think Post Partition was very, very much like I got to meet some brilliant South Asian creatives that I did not have on my radar, and now these people have like debut collections out. It's insane. So they're very much ahead of me, of course, in my journey. But I think definitely I felt there was an internal gap and a gap within the literature, kind of contemporary literature scene that's going on. So like
Sure.
The festivals, the award ceremonies that happen in the UK. So here we have like the Forward Prize. And it was like the first time after like I think 30 years or something that it had come up to Manchester from London. It'd always been in London, and I'd gotten some tickets to go see it. And it's very unfortunate. There were very, very few. I don't know how many South Asian poets were nominated. Very few. And again, same with the fact that not a lot of people of color were nominated for a lot of the prizes. So I think the idea of voids, and whenever I see a void in myself, or I don't really see myself or see the conversations that I want to have being, they're just absent, and I'm like, okay, I have to be very practical and just be like, no, this is what I'm going to talk about. And I think, the issues I like to talk about as well are things that have been said and done and dusted and printed into a collection and never spoken of again. Because you can be a poet, you can have a name, you can have 15 collections under your name and everything, but you will have that one poem in your brain, and I will have that one poem in my brain where I'm like, from that one collection, why are we not teaching that in schools? Why are we, not celebrating that as such a sort of significant poem that it's a personal thing, that it changed my mind and it changed the way I look at poetry. But I think, it is kind of really odd in a time for South Asian literature has come to a weird simmering end, in that we've not really seen anyone kind of like, Mohsin Hamid, or now we have people like Fatima Asghar, I feel, who's a brilliant Kashmiri poet who's, written for Disney now as well. But the main answer is kind of just absence and void, and
Yeah.
it's like a therapy in a way. It's kind of like
Yeah.
therapy, which is bizarre because so many poets do tell young poets, and it's not even like in a dangerous sense to say, but they do say go seek therapy first before you try and deal with issues that are very heavy. And whenever I sit with like a mentor that I'm with, so I'm with the Royal Society of Literature, like I get mentoring from one of the poets there, and they kind of are like, whenever I sit down with them and I talk with them, they're like, okay, but you're not being clear about this issue. What are you trying to say here? Like you're not extrapolating this enough. Like this is something internal in your mind
This
that
is
you haven't.
important for
Yeah,
you. This is
it's more for
important for
me.
you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I was like, this is getting very much it's giving Freudian, kind of like something deep set that I've not like turned over yet. So it is in a way very therapeutic, but also just fulfilling, I'd say. And people expect kind of philosophical answers to that, of like, why do you write about the struggle of colonial women? Why do you write about immigration and everything? I think it's not much, which is ironic to say because I just said like art is a political statement, and it is, but it's not so much a political statement as much as it is a statement to assure myself that I should be allowed and am allowed to talk about
Yeah.
this. Yeah, I'd say just
In the
allowance.
doing, like in the doing, in I see that like in the active, in the doing, in the creating of the event. You are in it. You have done it. So I don't know. I feel that. I feel
Yeah.
that vibe. One of the things I wanted to mention too about poets on the show, like I said, I've had a lot of episodes. The voice of the show, Rachel Lally, that you hear, is an Irish poet, actress, teacher, model, everything. But she's the voice of the show. And Jeff Finan, I've had, who's in Dublin, and had a spoken word episode as well, Zainab. That I'll post this with the episode in the notes for folks, and also send them to you. But
Please,
so
yes.
like I said, I've had a lot, and in just like, I think too, as a creator, is like I what am I looking for in that? I tell you one thing about poetry, the one thing, and it's not sophisticated, but I know about my sensitivity to it. So I adore paintings. And when I look at a painting, and a brilliant painting, that a German expressionist and Kirchner for me is like, there's something about the neurons in my head and what I see there, and looking at that is an experience I can't describe. Poetry for me, and there's a whole variety of poetry, but there's sometimes something in poetry where what I'm trying to say as a philosopher, if I'm engaging in that, which is a useful way of trying to say it, it's fucking impossible going that route. Like you're trying, right? And you write your essay, and then there's something, and there was nothing before that, so there's something before that, or is it like something else? And I don't know. There's a way of inflecting and showing something, like a weird moment in the corner that is profound, that you caught, that I had one of those in the past. And how do you explain that? How do you explain that it was transferred, and you're like, oh, I have permission to be like, remember that weird kind of cool event, and like, whoa. And there's no way to no way to mediate that except for it to happen. Yeah.
That's so true.
Maybe we figured it out together. I don't know. Poetry's awesome. That's my other way of expressing it. Poetry is cool.
Yeah. That's me going into a primary school, like an elementary school, and just
right.
It's cool.
I got a picture and a poster board. This is cool. We're gonna have fun, and it's poetry.
Yeah.
I wanted to
agree.
I wanted to ask you, and we had chatted about this, and I was so excited on the talking about the things, but I had chatted with you about possibly reading a poem.
Yes, of course. I'm so delighted you asked, because it's very no one, of course, as you know, wants to hear a poet.
That's something rather than nothing is dedicated and loves poets.
I appreciate you guys. I do. Gosh, thank you. Yes. So, yeah, I'm more than happy. So I thought you'd kind of said to do with like the change of being and change, and I thought this poem, I think it features, well, it features a Volta, I guess I can say technically it is very much within the realms of change, but I I kind of wrote this from a prompt. I'd done a couple of workshops with post Partition, and I kind of selected a few prompts from news articles about partition and immigration and everything, and how it's bizarre how doubled kind of partition occurs. There's an immigration, and then the inviting of economic and like sort of labor from the West, from well, inviting people from India, from Pakistan, Sri Lanka. So I think I was just really intrigued by this one statement a writer made. But I will read the poem, and if you like, we can discuss it after, because I much prefer kind of discussing
Yeah,
after, or however you want. Yeah.
yeah.
So the title is Circa. I'll explain the title after. And the statement, the kind of epigraph, is their history is refugee, their origin is immigrant. And that's by Priti Taneja, who is a writer discussing partition survivors that now live in Britain since the 80s and 90s. Okay. Circa. The mantelpiece is greying with such clusters of home, and our Christmas tree is weighty with baubles the size of laddus, is shining green like a passport, green as the suitcase I came in. Outside, a line of Molotov cocktails sit behind the bins. Our front garden is fermented with the vomit of passing pub-goers. I honour that suitcase, patching, balding like a relative around his edges. He sits above the fireplace like a tired imp, squatted on ignorance. I hold it in the kitchen, not by my side as though I'm going somewhere, but raised up as though I leave Parliament with another life in a leather capsule. Tonight, there are no attacks, not while I sleep in bed, once clutching my passport, but in dreaming it is a head, a crib, a buoy brisking, dangling itself on the sky as waves oscillate, a swelling burden of home in four wooden corners, in a moulded black handle. It falls off my bed, crashing as a brick is thrown through the window and colliding with the mantelpiece, making a hole in my stomach. I don't dream of home because someone made it become the sea of tea leaves and oil. I make no homes of the bricks thrown at my family. They're outside, past the rubble and partition of living room window. A fist of flames collects like a bar fight. Thank you. So yeah, that's
Oh,
Circa.
I thank you so much.
Thank
The
you.
experience was incredible. I want to tell you something too. My as I was listening to it, uh, I had a professor, poetry guy, brilliant
Mm,
poet, taught me all these type of things. But we came into his class, and he was talking about poetry and going through it, and what it means, of course, this whole type of thing and how it sounds. And this guy was like, fuck all that noise with like all this, like listen first, just listen as long as you want, listen for hours, read it out loud for hours, and like, what is this guy talking about? Because our heads are going towards the figuring the thing out. I guess what I wanted to say is, I did both experiences of hearing the words in that way and then pulling back out and
mhm.
hearing the bumps of your voice, and it brought up, like, how do you talk about poetry? Because I'm moved by her, and I'd be like, I think it means this, Zainab. Like you read that, and maybe I'll ask another question. Like, I think maybe that's some of the discomfort. Like I was making that joke of
Yeah.
like the guy down the street who's doing poetry, but it reflects something that's there, being like, what do we do with
Yeah.
poetry, and like, how do we talk about it? Like,
Yeah.
what do you think?
God, it is a hard question, isn't it? But I think you're right, and your professor was right. Just forget that and just listen to the noise, because I think poetry is meant to make noise, and it's meant to, as I said, like shift something. And whenever I talk about it, I kind of want to say to people, don't let it be sort of wallowing. Don't let it be, the black and white images of Hardy or anything like that. So, and I guess when people are saying like, oh, you shouldn't ask for meaning, death of the author and everything, and every what have you, but I don't really agree with that. I think
Well, there's so much.
that,
It's all about the meaning. I'm gonna say the photographs
yeah,
that you place in there in the poem, the Molotov cocktails, in the
yeah,
color of the passport, and the color. Like I said, when I was
thank you,
at there,
yeah,
I have all that there, and then and move
yeah.
it to the sound. And I was wondering, I'm like, I've been trained in two ways: to hear the things, to interpret what they mean, and find universal meaning, and the other one is to hear the cadence, and
Mm.
so they compete.
Yeah.
They compete.
Yes, you do have to find that balance, I think, of sort of attraction with voice, I think. Because yeah, you don't want images to fall flat on their faces, and they don't. Thankfully, any type of poetry
Yeah.
performance I hear, and I never, as long as you're listening, of course, that's the main thing. As long as I'm listening and the audience is listening. But I think, yeah, the picking up of the Molotov cocktails and the color, and I think I just was so intrigued by, I think, law and protest, because obviously maybe Molotov cocktails are a bit violent for just just to say protest, but that's the
They lift the weight you need them to lift.
yeah, they definitely do. But they represent. I think the Molotov cocktail just represents something not even violent, just very much defensive. The idea that it's just stacked and prepared like ammo, in a way, because it's to draw on sort of protest within. And what's awful is the fact that stuff like Paki bashing used to occur, which is just the skinheads and punks just rounding up together and coming to just beat up Pakistani,
Horrific.
Bengali, Indian. Yeah. So when people were protesting this, the South Asian youth were the ones leading this charge, as are many sort of. I'm really proud to say that Manchester is a city of protest more than anything else. It's a huge place for Marxism, industrialization, sure, but also welfare, and general labor upkeep. And I think I was very much inspired by these exhibitions we have at the Manchester Central Library. We have a race centre, which archives a lot of protests from Black, Afro-Caribbean, and South Asian communities coming together. And the thing is that everyone used to be just coupled under the term Black. So even South Asians and whoever was basically making a ruckus and protesting was just considered to be like Black and against skinheads. So I think I took a lot of inspiration from my hometown, sure, and this idea of, I think, transport, but static kindness as well, in that you are constantly held by fear and violence, and constantly having to repair a home that will not allow you to call it a home, I guess. And that is the immigrant experience, I feel. Especially, I can't speak to that because I was born here, so it's a lot more what my my family and what my community is kind of grown up with and seen firsthand and talked about to me as well. Thankfully, people are very open about it now. Whereas whenever I talk to sort of poets from who have like immigrant parents, they say that their parents are very shameful. They're very much ashamed of talking. And I think that's a thing about poetry. You can't really have a lot of shame, because if you aren't very much on the borderline of exposure and, I guess, ownership of that exposure as well. There's a very fine line, I think, where you have to be quite exposed and you have to be very open. Like I said, it is a therapy session for a lot of us, but
Yeah.
it's very much this very exposing and bare bones kind of like this is violence that's happening, and people are prepared for it, but they're never prepared for it at the same time. And and saying to make people uncomfortable isn't the right word either, but it's to just bring attention. And whether that makes you uncomfortable is it's not the emotion I can control, of course. And I would much rather people be open about that to me, in being like, maybe uncomfortable, but it made me think at the same time. So I've done my purpose. I've done what I had to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was just a whole case of like, I was just contemplating how violence was just, a constant thing that happened in the 70s, 80s, 90s. And then it's oddly enough smoothened out now to the point where we are multicultural, we're accepting of one another. Nothing like this occurs now, thankfully. But to think that your ancestors, or your just the people now the people I know in my daily life went through and witnessed these things, and you're like, no one wants to talk about it, but I have to force them out. I have to force it out through poetic form. Yeah.
I remember talking to a very good friend of mine. Was prominent in the Washington, D.C. Punk scene a while back in the 90s. And this was a huge scene, and very political. But I remember being amazed, my jaw agape, when he told me the true history of trying to control that scene for safety, freedom, and space against skinheads in DC, because there were actual jostles within the scene to make it safe for others, or to lose that battle in fighting. You want to push out the fascist elements. And when he, and he's an African American guy in punk, telling me about how, because I know from the outside, you're at a concert or whatever. I mean, you might not know, but the type of things you were talking about happen in U.S. cities, right? And it seems like, oh, that was happening. And I remember reading and hearing about the reports over by you. So just learning that there's no snapping of the fingers that made some spaces safe for others and not for others. It was a fight for some of that stuff, and that's just real,
Definitely. With, I think, anything needs to come with challenge, and I'm just echoing what previously said. Of course, is just art and protest and messages, and whether a lot of the time, obviously, punks and having to come full sort of head, like kind of ahead of with one another, and it takes so much out of you. In the arts, it takes so much out of you to have to be exposed and having to constantly deliver a tiring kind of message that you've rehearsed in your mind. But then there were you've got to think about the generations before us that were on the streets actively being like, what is going on, what is happening? And in no way, shape or form could you say though that like the poetry scene is any more subtle or less impactful either, but it is very much a thing of like, I've seen it change people's attitudes towards specific forms of poetry, like spoken word or slam poetry. There's weirdly enough a weird class divide. I don't know if you've noticed, but there is definitely, and in Manchester there's even like a geographical divide of like certain poets from certain areas who prefer to do a lot more rap based, a lot more music based poetry, and some are very much in their sort of little notebooks, notepad, note apps and everything, just writing the precise detail of emotional kind of ducks falling into deeper waters or something. And I'm like, it's brilliant, it's contentious but beautiful. I can't say I wasn't one of them. So
no, hey, it's that exercise. We gotta get at the big strange question, and for you to take a crack at it whatever way you want. Why is there something rather than nothing?
Why is it something rather than nothing? And it's so appropriate now that I know that you've done philosophy as well. This question is so philosophical.
It's so unfair. It doesn't matter. Whenever I ask the question, it's like, That person's being unfair, fundamentally unfair. But
and I like that. I appreciate any sort of medium that is not being fair to me, because where is the fun in it then? I think I've just based my whole life in academia. That's why I'm saying that. But why is it something rather than nothing? And I don't know how many people have said this, but something gives you hope at least. Nothing is
that.
just, nothing is just, as I said, I'm fearful of the void. I'm not a fan of the void. I'm not a fan of nothing. I'm very much a fan of, give me the crumbs, give me anything, give me something. So I think, and anything can come from something. And these are all just turning into suffixes now, really. But
It's all the
yeah.
trick. It's all part
But
of
I love it. it's the hope. I think it's just the hope.
I've heard that thematically, and I think when I first heard it, it was always kind of like, but I think no, I hear that a lot because I think people take it from it's almost like if you look at nothing as that absence or there being no thing, and then you're saying something, it's like, well, maybe I can't prove or show or ever know, but I'm gonna put my chips over on the something side, like I'm gonna put them over that way. It's like Pascal's argument for the wager on God is like, well, in one wager, if you place it here, you can win eternal glory. The other way, if you don't put your money over there, you got no chance. So I'm going to put it on the one with the one for the chance for eternal glory. And I love and respect that argument more than anything I think I've ever heard.
That's so true. I don't know why I was immediately thinking of Achilles, and the hero Achilles is like, well, he's guaranteed to die anyway, bless him, but he's going for it, right?
You're right.
He sulks for so long of the Iliad, but he comes through in the end. And
that's
we don't know what
review. That's the quick review I think you just gave. Sulks, and then he came.
Yeah, he's just awful to everyone, and then he hears Patroclus is in danger, and then he hears something happens, and he's like, no, gotta go now. So I think if we're looking at it very Achillean, Pascalian kind of,
I don't know. I think we might be end up producing here the typical Iliad poetry, Manchester Industrial Revolution, Marxist history, what is art, Kirchner type of episode, just like that. Just another one.
Yeah. In fairness, I could recommend. There is a band that I love called The Mechanisms, and this is so off topic, but it is very much related to saying let's do an Iliad.
Yeah. It's on topic on this show.
Thanks. They were a cabaret band of adventuring space pirates. So they all had characters. All the band had characters, and they had albums based on folklore. So the first album was on the Grimm brothers fairy tale. So the first one was called Once Upon a Time in Space. The space pirates.
Yeah.
And then I think it's the second one is called Ulysses Dies at Dawn, and it's a Chicago mob Iliad sort of mix of Greek mythology. It's insane.
Wow.
It's so raucous and hilarious and brilliant, but you go into the underworld, you see Prometheus defy the gods, you visit Ulysses, Odysseus, and he's got a drinking problem and he's really upset because he can't get home. So I'd say what I do is listen to the Mechanisms, because they're very inspirational in that, turning something from nothing, seemingly nothing, but something from something. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a fun play. I remembered we got just a little bit more because I don't want to forget a couple things, but I had asked you very naively about dark academia and that kind of aesthetic, and what I mentioned to you, and it was just curiosity. So I had plunking around, I had heard this type of music or playlist, and I read a little bit about the kind of things that it invokes, this kind of melancholy, darkness, comforting in the darkness. I don't know how to describe it all, but and seeing with your Instagram, I hadn't seen, I saw that right there, so I'm like, well, I have such a facile understanding of it, having just recently encountered. I wanted to ask you
Yeah,
about that
it's
conceit
yeah,
of dark academia.
absolutely. I think it was. I don't want to disappoint and say it was a phase where I was like, I'm very into dark academia, but I wouldn't say it's a phase either. It is very much a it's interesting because how subcultures occurred from whatever age, I'd say, whenever subcultures were occurring sociologically, mods, rockers, and what have you, of course. Now I feel as Gen Z, we kind of are very focused on wanting to sort of represent, but through fashion, I think it's all kind of blended now. But dark academia, madly enough, was now has been much more fashion based and much more aesthetics based. But if you go really deep into it, it's the Donna Tartt, the Dead Poets Society, writing in the cold with your fingers nearly freezing to death because of the snow, and this, yeah, as you said, melancholy, and this, but also like sporadic urges to write something very philosophical, very poetic at 3 a.m, and you need to get this idea down now. It's this chaoticness and urgency,
Hmm.
but it's underpinned by philosophy, by education, academia, traditional sort of classical education. And I think it is not even just about academic success, it's just about being in the throes of a certain muse within yourself saying, why aren't you researching, why aren't you reading about this one tablet
Hmm.
from ancient Aztec or whatever, like ancient Mesopotamia or something, like it's just the thirst for knowledge, I guess. And
Yeah.
it's kind of transliterated into aesthetic, I'd say, with anything really. It's a fashion choice, it's a lifestyle. It's not a very, very healthy one, to be very much in the constant burnout phase, I guess, is what people romanticize a
Yeah, I'd
lot.
imagine there's,
Yeah.
not the fetishism of some of the elements that we would see as like injurious to the self, but
Yeah.
like seeing that vibe. Is it like Thanos and Eros? I mean, like, where's the Eros in it? Like, is it around the? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, is it this sort of like chaos of kind of just reveling in your love for knowledge? And is it even like a thirst, or is it meant to be a thirst, or is it just
You know what I
your
picked up on? Not to
mm,
interrupt, Zainab.
yeah,
What I
yeah,
picked up on for me that I launched into it at some of the visuals that I would see would be
yeah,
the darkly the darkly appealing, right? So if you're into books, like libraries are like,
yeah,
what are the words for it? But they're also, for me, have been around like being excited, like intellectually, but also like this, like eroticism around like curiosity and like
mm,
searching, and like when people are like, oh, like like what are they doing at like 8:30, like
yeah,
like in a very curious and weird way, where
mm,
you can go by people in a bookstore, same type of thing, who are like, they're like,
intently, yeah,
yeah, like that
ripping the hair
I
out,
might be attracted to like that jag, like what they got.
yeah.
But there's some like just noticing that type of thing. And so I'm just saying it's like a curious way that I looked at it, because obviously it's probably like rooted in some things I'll never like leave behind. Goth and the
Mm,
queer and the dark. Like I can't leave those things behind. They're
no,
a part of my thinking. But I also know enduring in that space is not the path I'm on, of
mm,
enduring in that space. So it's not to fetishize, or well, I guess it
no,
probably is to romanticize, the romantic type of thing,
yeah.
but I don't know.
No, you're so right in this. Yeah, it is not even, I wouldn't say obsession. It is this just manic passion, this sort of Bacchus, like kind of bacchanal kind of uncontrollable urge to just know a specific thing, as you said. Like, yeah, you're right. Like, what are people doing when I go to like a 24-hour library? Like, what are you doing with this massive weighty tome?
I
And
know.
like, why are you booking out this book from the 16th century, like, that you won't get for like another 2 days, but you're just like constantly like nail biting waiting for to get your hands on it. I wonder if it is this sort of intrinsic, instinctual fear of hearing about the Library of Alexandria, or like,
Yeah.
never getting to read Sappho's fragments, and things, so much information that's just lost to us.
Well, the
And
idea that you
yeah,
might not read a book, like that
yeah,
weird idea that has no place in the head. Like, I can't put that anywhere.
yes.
I
Oh, that idea screws in my mind so much, because I'm like, why would I care? But
Worst idea in the world ever.
it's like, I totally get it, but I'm at the same time, I'm like, I'm not gonna have time for that.
People must live eternally because they still have to read. That's my
Precisely.
simple argument. All right, Zainab, how do listeners find your stuff, your website? Folks, I've ordered some stuff from Zainab that she sent a while ago, but they're on the aeroplane over the sea.
They're ridiculous with that, honestly. Gosh.
But tell folks, like, where to find
Yeah.
you, your stuff, see you if applicable.
Yeah, thank you. So you can find me on aptly named Dark Academia Zainab. So it's dark period academia period Zainab on Instagram. You can find me on my website, zainabthepoet.co.uk. Very short and simple for that one, as you can tell. And I think that those are the main sort of avenues. I'm very active on my Instagram, so please just drop a message and tell me what your favorite poet is, or recommend some poems, because I'm always wanting to read more and distract myself from my dissertation. Yeah, that's the rub. Sorry.
You've revealed something large within the academic world, of which I must check in about.
Yeah.
You didn't think you had a traffic cop here. No, but yes, please, if you know any aspect of working on a dissertation, please distract Zainab. You're there.
I would appreciate it
that are
so
stimulating
much
for the brain, or you're curious about. So.
I've got about 2 months, so you've got a good amount of time.
All right. But it is it's been a great chat, and I think we're both excited. Some of the similar interest in being able to connect in this way. I always think it's super special that it's the magic that, like, we're able to talk and meet in this type of way, and like get into I think it was 2,122 topics that we did. So if anybody needs a little bit more on those, we could parse through. But.
Yeah, I'm down. I'm happy. I've got a laptop. I'm ready.
So it's again, thank you for coming on, and everybody check out.
Thank you for having me. This is such a delight and highlight of my year so far. Honestly, it's been brilliant.
That's super. In February from the airplane across the sea. So
yeah. Oh gosh. Thank you so much.
This is Something Rather Than Nothing.